Kristen, and welcome to Repair University Live. We are so excited you joined us today. I'm not gonna lie, it's getting a little weird.
Crazy
It's
on
getting a
the
little
set.
weird around here today.
A little crazy on the set.
But it is still, it's 94
Act serious.
today. So we brought the welders inside. But truth be told, I just kind of carry them around with me anyway.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I walk them.
It's a little weird when you're at Walmart and you got a welder with you.
But you know, you never know.
You never know.
The occasion's going to rise. You got to fix a shelf or do something kind of crazy or whatever. So, all right, we're going to talk about squeeze type resistant spot welding. So there is a lot of misconceptions around it.
Oh boy.
There's a lot of myths
Yep.
around it. And one of those being, oh, this is just simple. All you do is pull the trigger.
Yeah.
Yay.
Well, it actually is that simple. There's a lot more to it, though.
All right, so let's start off with just a level setting, Larry. What is this? What's resistance welding? How does it work? Where are we at?
Well, if they read the screen, they can say it.
Ah!
Okay, I'll read, and I'll read in English. No, basically, you know, the resistance welding came out in the early 20s. I think Lincoln Welding, somebody at Lincoln Welding actually developed the whole process of it, and it went through the manufacturers and stuff like that. But basically, you have two electrodes that come together and meet at a piece of metal, and the electrical current gets forced through one of the electrodes through the other electrode, and the resistance of the steel in between causes enough heat to generate, depending on the electrical current and the pulse, to actually create a welded area.
Kind of a short circuit, like the scissors in
Yeah.
in a plug-in outlet when you were a kid.
Yeah, right, that works real well. Or lick your fingers and stick them in the socket.
I've been a resistance welder for a while then.
So you have this heat at the interface in between the two of them. The key advantage of this is obviously you give a factory appearance to it. It's a very short process time. Might take you a little bit longer setting up the panel than with, let's say, something like mag plug welds, but on the back end of it, it goes very, very quickly, and there's almost little to no cleanup when you're done, because what you cleaned off the panel flanges pretty much stays the same afterwards. You're just hitting it real quick with a light abrasive type of object. You're not thinning out the metal, you're just cleaning up the area. You don't have to worry about consumables except for the contact tips, which
There definitely is consumables.
well,
with
they can
tips.
be cleaned and they can be used, you know, throughout the process, and you're going to be shocked at how many times you should be using them.
Yep.
But you don't have MIG brazing materials, solder, welding rods, welding wire, and stuff like that. It's pretty much an easy process to learn. Operator safety is a little low because there's very little sparking, if ever. There shouldn't be, otherwise you're doing something wrong. You don't have to wear a face shield outside of a clear one. You don't have to have some sort of UV protection or anything like that. You really don't need heavy-duty welding gloves that make it bulky to grab things. You don't have to wear a welding jacket. I mean, you still have to wear your normal protective type stuff, non-flammable work clothes, and leather boots and stuff like that.
So you're telling me that when I pull the trigger, it's not supposed to spark?
No, it's not supposed to. You're not supposed to get that.
Yeah, sparking is an indicator that something's wrong.
Yeah, generally,
I mean,
yes.
a little bit of spark, but when it goes kaboom,
Yeah,
that's
you've got
a
a problem.
problem.
You're starting blowing out the metal, and that
Yeah.
usually means that you don't have enough pressure, or the panel isn't clamped together properly.
or it's dirty.
It's clean because as long as you clean the panels beforehand, when you weld, you're really not getting any gases or anything like that, because you're not burning off anything because you cleaned it already, and you're not heating it to the point that you're adding some other sort of material that has to burn or melt into the area.
And you said something, Larry, I just want to back up here real quick. You said, it's safe, we don't have to have all the safety stuff, and to which I agree, but we got to really remember, we got 12,000 amps still going through this. So there is some...
Well, there's EMI that's involved in that, and obviously you have to take the precautions if you have a pacemaker or anything like that, which it really shouldn't affect you, but you need to check that out with your doctor because we're not doctors. And you have to watch your electrical components on either the vehicle you're welding on, or in like the case of a transformer machine with a smaller gun head. These are trans guns. You might have it against another car that you're not working on, and that might get affected, that car versus
So there's
through
some
EMI.
cautions, and I'm actually involved in a case in California currently. It's in litigation, where the technician didn't use it correctly and basically welded through their hand. And then it's all the training issues and all that. So got to respect this.
Tell me there's
but
pictures.
there's a whole bunch of common sense kind of things that if you just take, you're okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
You got pictures of that, right?
I do.
Okay,
Yeah,
I
you
can't
really
share
wanna
them
do it
until after.
And if the machine's used properly and the setup is proper and your settings are proper, We'll talk about settings later. And the panel flanges were set up properly and clamped together properly and close together, and you follow all the right stuff. You have really a very reliable electromechanical type fastening that went on, or
joint,
attachment.
All right. So overall, it's repeatable,
Yep.
right? It's clean. It's a little safer. Well, it's safer not only for the person using it, but for
Little
also other
quicker.
people in the
It
shop.
takes less skill than mag welding,
Yeah.
which most techs can't really mag weld properly. So
And that
this is a much easier way.
That repeatability is really
Yeah.
why they always like it, right?
Yeah, and one of the things that we see in the field on cars that have been repaired is there is some training, and you got to take that training to know how to clamp the panels up, get them correctly, shunt the panel, and all that. So one of the things about these machines is the salespeople come in a lot of times going, "Oh, it's just so easy. Go over there, grab the secretary, have him or her, just do it real quick." And the reality is there is some training. There's the training curve's pretty low
the
compared to mag
sales
welding.
pitch trickery versus the actual application. I love when a guy comes in and says, "Well, we can weld 37 panels together." You never do it on a car.
Right.
You're not welding 4 inches of metal together.
No,
So I'm
you're not.
sorry,
Yeah.
it's just not going to happen. I really don't care about that. Oh, I can do it underwater. That's great. Maybe
not
we should
doing
put you in a
that.
tub with a radio. So you do have to understand there is some training that goes into this, and there's some terminology we need to go over and stuff. Factory welds or factory spot welds, you'll see written spot welds sometimes, or just resistant spot welds are generally from the factory type stuff.
Yep.
Squeeze type resistant spot welds or STRSW will be the abbreviation usually that you'll see for repair welds. You have ones that are air-cooled tips, which probably aren't as popular as they used to be. More for the mild steels and the high-strength steels or low-grade high-strength steels, not the advanced high-strength steels. Water-cooled tips is probably what most of the machines are that you're getting nowadays. Kind of like with the frame machines we've talked about in measuring equipment. If you bought a welder or resistance welder 20 years ago, 10 years ago, you might want to think about upgrading.
Well, you can use it on cars that are 25 years old.
Exactly, or on some mild steel stuff.
Yep.
You have a transformer type machine, and you have a trans gun or transformer type gun machine. You have EMI you have to watch out for. You'll see a lot of times electromagnetic induction, which is the right-handed rule of electricity. As my current goes through, there's a force field that comes around the outside, and this will create issues. That's why you shouldn't leave your wallet on top of here.
Yeah, your credit
cell
cards will
phone,
get fried.
or anything like that. And there's been times where you have a trans gun is even worse. You'll have almost like, you'll be straddling this hose, and it'll be sitting over here, and you'll go to weld with the smaller headed gun,
Larry,
and
can you
it jumps up.
Can you demonstrate
Oh
that?
no! If one is not plugged in, I'm not doing that. But yeah, it'll slap you, and it hurts. I've done shows before with Carolina. I've had this gun in there, and I'll have pieces of metal there, and it'll fly right to the gun when you go to weld it. So you have to watch what's around you. Remember that you're also going to see shunting or clamping is another big issue. And a big issue no one realizes is pitch and edge distance. We're going to talk about those afterwards too.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
All right. So we've covered some of the basic terms, but let's talk about what's different between the transformer machines and the transformer guns.
Well, we have the CR500/510 on the left-hand side here. The next picture next to it, the other blue machine, is the Pro Spot I4. Those are both transformer machines. And how you can tell the difference is that they have usually very heavy, thick 2 lines, positive, negative,
Yep.
and a much smaller gun head that's on there, a little bit lighter weight, so the transformer's inside the machine, okay? Now the trans gun, such as the Wylander Shill VAS model over there and the Carolina CTR 12,000, have a much larger, heavier head on them, and this is the new Carolina machine that has a much smaller unit, the CT7.
CT7, small body.
And
Yep.
you have almost an identical head gun here. That this is a little bit lighter weight machine, so the transformer is actually in the head. So it's just 2 different type machines. All these machines and machines similar to that are approved by numerous OEMs and stuff like that for different facets, and they have all different options for them and stuff like that. So do your research before you purchase.
And you're generally going to see on the trans guns. You're going to generally see a counterbalance. 'Cause
Yeah,
these
there's
can get
counterbalance
heavy.
because it just gets a little
gets
heavy
heavy,
after
yep.
a while. But what's also nice about these machines is generally you have some
360.
sort of nada or movement here
go
that you'll be
360.
able to spin this 360, so you don't have to muscle it around yourself.
Yep.
The other ones, Sometimes do, sometimes don't, but they're not as bad to turn around.
Right.
The trans gun, as you can see, it's a big heavy line. Sometimes you overstep it, like I said, and you'll go to zap it, and the line will move and actually hit you, and it can smart sometimes. Hopefully, you only do that trick once.
All right, so with any welding process, and we're going to kind of go through this and address some of those myths, misnomers, misconceptions, and some of that. But the key with any weld, doesn't matter what welder you buy, how expensive it is, what features it has, setup. So setup's critical.
Everything.
To get,
Well,
to
this
get
is all
together.
your additional procedures that everyone doesn't realize that they should be listing on the damage report.
Yeah, the welder setup is estimating lines.
It's all estimating lines, and it's stuff that has to be done. I mean, weld safety. Well, first off, your weld screen. If you can't find a weld screen in your shop, go to your buffing department. It's probably in there. It's being used as a buffing screen. But you need to have those. Fire extinguisher should be in the area. I've talked about a welding cart you should make and have it nearby, which will have your welding blankets, your spark paper, any type of tools to disconnect the battery, electric strap to prevent you from grabbing a module and actually frying it.
The one that goes to your wrist.
Yeah, the one that goes to your wrist and stuff like that. Three different fire extinguishers: a water, sand, maybe a Class D and an ABC.
Yep.
Remember, always check your tips before you go welding. Always check these tips at all times. It's very, very important to make sure the tips are clean and nice and stuff like that.
They're not supposed to have adhesive all over them.
No, they're supposed to be adhesive with dirt. We're
worn down to nothing.
No, we're going to talk about tips later on.
Talk a
Make
little
sure
bit
they're
more
also
about
lined
tips,
up.
but that's the biggest thing: lineup, angle, and cleanliness.
Yeah, everything. You know, even these C-clamp type design ones can have an issue with lineup sometimes because this is adjustable here on this particular model. On the other ones that it's set in, sometimes the arm gets bent. Guys have
well,
dropped them.
the other part of it is so these come in pretty straight.
Yeah.
And the other ones that kind of clamp around,
That's an issue.
that's where you get the angle issue.
Yeah, and that's where the angle issue comes, and you also lose power. The longer the arm goes, you can lose 2/3 of power with that. Plug in the machine is part of your setup, obviously. Try to avoid using a extension cord unless it's approved by the manufacturer who made it. Because the thinner the line, the more drop-off in electricity you have. Just like when you get the line inside the shop, code might call for 6-gauge wire when you should really be using 2 or 4-gauge wire, depending on how far
That's
you're
a big
running
wire,
around
too.
the shop. It's huge. It's it's heavy. It's expensive, and electricians hate putting it in. You need a 60 amp breaker minimum. Don't follow code. You need to go above code. Remember, code is the bare minimum to make it pass. And what'll happen is you'll get rattling in the rafters. You'll get the circuit blowing out all the time if you don't follow what the manufacturer of the equipment tells you to put in the shop.
I don't think it's a good point because we have a lot of shops that'll go buy a piece of equipment, but then fail to make sure that their building can actually have the power to support
No,
that
but the
piece
plug
of
actually fits the
It
receptacle.
fits, it'll come on.
Yeah, good.
Right.
Yeah, beautiful.
But we just don't have the amperage at the tips that's required to actually do the work.
Make sure you have your air pressure set into it. Once again, like anything else, can make sure that it's a line that has, free of oil and grease and water and moisture. Check your initial setup of the machine. Each machine has its own little initial setup. Most of these are computerized. You're gonna have to turn it on. It's not plugged in, but you're gonna turn it on, and you have to wait maybe 30 seconds to a minute for it to go through just to turn on. Once it's turned on, then there's usually some sort of setup you have to do with it. This machine here, you'll put it into set EL. It actually has right on here, it says, remember, check EL, which is your electrode, and you'll have to squeeze the button the way it tells you to actually have it go back and forth and do its, pre-set up to be able to be
So you have to
welded.
read.
You got to read a little bit. Yeah, you got to go through a couple of processes and then
I
click a
thought I
couple
had
of
found my
buttons.
home, but I still have to read.
Do you have an OEM program? Some of these things come set up with Benz, Audi, Porsche, Buick, Chevy, whatever.
Right.
Some of them have preset manuals in there. Are you going to do a manual setup? Some companies require a manual welding on certain areas. Remember, auto mode is nice, but it's not a cure-all, and it does not ensure proper welds on everything. There's still other things you have to do. Check your arms. And why don't we just check your arms? Make sure that the arm I'm using here is the arm that's going to fit around my entire welding process. If I need a bigger arm, then I better plan that, or if I need one of the A-tongs or something like that, make sure you check out and know what you're going to do.
And every time you change arms, we
you
got to
gotta
do
change the
additional
arm
weld
in the
tests.
machine
And additional weld
electronically.
tests, too.
Right.
So is it reasonable, right? Where's Danny when we need him? Okay, is it reasonable that if I'm reading my OE procedures and I'm looking and I may have
Phil Danny. No.
two arm changes,
Yeah.
right?
It's 2 welder setups and 2 practice welds.
That's not
And 2
included?
destructive welds. Nope.
Yeah. No, not included.
You know, and they do say that, you know, if you're in an opening, an aperture opening, like in a, you know, door opening, they say use the short ones. But then when you get on to like the quarter panels, you need the longer arms. They say to switch arms.
And you can probably find a happy medium with like one of the medium-sized arms. I'll go over some arms afterwards that would fit both and not cause an issue with a drop-off in power or anything like that, or be too bulky and heavy.
But it's still back to a weld test and destruct test.
Yeah.
And then bulletproof file, pictures and documentation.
Without a
in the
doubt.
file.
I mean, I don't say you should keep all this metal that you do destructive testing with. Maybe write the RO number on it, take a picture of it, and get rid of it. Check your output pressure on the machine. Now they do sell, Tefalo, I think is the name of the company, sells a pressure gauge that goes in here. And you can squeeze it and find out what your outlet pressure is right here. And I mean, it's probably an $800 gauge, but it's really, really important to understand what's going on because it can help you diagnose your machine. No different than, and the guys who do aluminum welding will know this, you have a gauge, which it's a plastic tube with little numbers on it and a little ball that floats up and down. And what it does is check your outlet pressure for gas on welding.
Yeah.
You should be using it for mag welding. You should be using it for silicone bronze or MIG brazing, but you have to use it with aluminum because if your weld isn't proper, you need to check that and see if there's a problem with the line. And this little ball floating up and down in this tube will tell you that. Well, the only way to check this is the air pressure here to find out what the pressure is between the tips and if there's a problem with it.
Exactly.
And that Tefalo, I think is the name of the company, is the only way to check that pressure.
So let's say I've bought a smart welder. Turns out there's a lot of me that has to make sure this welder's
Unless
smart.
you're paying like $1 million, and even then, there's some computer engineer that walks by that welder, that $1 million welder that's at the factory, that has to punch numbers in and make sure it's correct as the machine goes around and does like 80, 90 welds. They have to know what's going on, and then somebody has to go over and physically change these all the time.
Yeah.
Make your practice welds. Besides your practice welds, do destructive testing and document all your photos. And that's really pretty much your weld setup, weld practice, destructive testing in a nutshell what you're doing there, okay? And also practice all the welds that you're going to be using with the different arms.
Absolutely.
You know?
All right,
Changing
so-
arms, you're doing it again.
So right now I know, one, here's about 4 or 5 things that should be on my estimate as additional labor operations that are not
Or you
included
can make
in
a
panel
one line
replacement.
and then put, you know, time includes, and then put a note. If you want to save some room on your estimate.
Yep. All right, so we know we got that.
Yep.
And now I know that if I thought my spot welder was smart and all I had to do was just plug it in and drag it over to the car and pull the trigger, well, that's not the case.
That's
Well, I
not the
can hire a
case.
monkey to do your job.
Well,
No,
your
no,
monkey's
so
occupied.
the smart welder, you know, a smart welder is, and they call it that because it's computerized, et cetera.
Yeah.
But, you know, back in the old days, we used to do weld tests, and then they came out with a computer that would actually check the amperage coming through here. That's all it's doing.
Yeah.
So, you know, we actually had one in Seattle where the shop just couldn't, they were doing this destruct test and they kept putting it through and the machine said it passed. Machine says, yep, we're good. But the reality was on the destruct test, it fell apart. And it happened many, many, many times. And then they went back to the OEM information and they didn't read the part that said right here, these 3 metals together can't be squeeze typed, you have to mag it.
Yep.
And they went, oh, had we read that to begin with?
We wouldn't have wasted all this time.
But had they not done the destruct test, the machine said it was good, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
No, right, exactly.
So now, in addition to what we're seeing with the guns here, there's a lot of attachments, and I can't properly repair a car unless I have these attachments.
Correct.
You got to have them all. They all got to be in working order too. You can't just go, I think we have them somewhere, right? Let's go over these real quick.
Well, depends on the company, but there's A-tongue, wheelhouse arm, C-arm. That's a short one, X adapter, and then a whole bunch of bigger C-arms that come in 40, 80, 280, 350, 500, 600 millimeters, depending on the company you're purchasing it from. The one big thing you have to keep in mind when you do switch arms out is that you have to shut the machine off because it's water cooled to the tips. If it's not water cooled to the
You
tips,
only do that once.
yeah, and it's all over the
spray
place.
coolant
It's like
everywhere.
you got to draw a chalk line around the outside and stuff like it's like a murder victim scene. You got to call CSI. There's antifreeze all over the place.
Yep.
Keep in mind though that even without water cooled tips, just air cooled, you should still shut the machine off. You don't want something to happen that you don't want to have happen.
Or weld
and
through
want
your
to put
hand.
accident.
Well, through your hand.
Well, through your hand, you know, because this thing will crush your hand. The other thing also to keep in mind that you do have to periodically check your coolant not only
Right.
for the level, but also for its purity,
Yep.
because you don't want to make a petri dish out of it and have some sort of bad fishbowl accident go on, and it becomes a nightmare. And then it costs you a lot of money to get the machine flushed out or even change the water lines on this thing.
Yep.
Make
Right.
sure that you do have a bunch of extra rubber seals for this, because if one breaks, the machine's down.
Yep.
Have a couple extra hoses and hose clamps that they can sell you. God forbid something goes wrong, you can fix it right on the spot. And you need a big, huge bag of a lot of tips, and we'll talk about that.
Well, and
after.
that's the emergency kit on top of the welder with different pieces and parts, because things break.
Things break, things fall apart, and you have also some replacement stuff in here and stuff of that matter, and different adapters that you very rarely use. Let's say I got to weld a couple of pins on, then probably an adapter to give me some weld some pins on to be able to attach interior components, trim components and stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, a lot of stuff there. So,
Oh, wow.
well, you know what, guys? We go out to shops all year long, and sometimes we go like the Three Musketeers, and then we separate and go different places. And I can go in it never fails. I would love for one day for me to walk into a shop that I'm like, oh my God, this is awesome.
I've been
But
in 2 out of probably 2,000.
Yeah.
a
Where
small number.
the shop can be Taj Mahal, they're ultimate, we OE, we follow all procedures, and then we walk up on this. This is what their welder
That's
looks
exactly.
like.
Well, I remember that one shop. I'm not going to name names. we had the guy in the office in the tie, and he said, "I know I'm good. I'm one of the best in the world, and we do great OEM. We only work on this certain model, and we're great." So we walked in, and that's not the picture, but the tips were completely mushroomed out, and they didn't have any replacement tips. So every car was getting welded with that, and then almost every car. And we walked into the paint booth on that one, and basically, Larry, was it a key or a screwdriver? You started popping welds, and they got mad at you.
And just started popping welds.
Yeah, he got mad at you.
They got mad at me.
And then the worst part is he painted the car anyway. Yep. Over the top of the bad weld. So that's why we're not naming names. Whole different conversation. But this is huge in almost every shop, that the maintenance on the weld tips. And so I called and talked to some of the manufacturers of these welders and said, how often should we be changing this? These tips, when they come out and they're new and the metal's all ready to go, they weld really great. But when you start getting tips that are all worn out, that's when you start seeing the sparks flying and all that. And at the factory, they even change, they're welding the car together. The factory, they're doing their welds, and then a certain number of welds, 40 or 60 or whatever, they change the tips out, and boom, they keep going. But then, you take some of the tips in some of these shops, and they've done 2,500 welds. Well, so we can say that 50 of those were probably good, and the other balance of that wasn't a good weld. Now, back to liability, it's all about the next accident.
Right, so if I'm going to put on, let's just pick a quarter panel, right? How many spot welds in a typical SUV? Just guess, guys. We're not pulling up
Maybe
a
about
procedure.
100,
125.
150.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, someplace in that area.
So if I'm
depending.
getting 40 to 60 on a set of tips, then on an
Well, you got to
estimate-
dress the tips. Then you can keep going with the same tips.
So
Yeah.
on an estimate, I may have additional time to dress tips, and then I may have a set of tips. If I'm putting a
I would personally just charge for one set of tips
Yep.
for each quarter
Per car.
panel.
Yep.
Maybe some other vehicle components. A Uniside, you probably charge for a set of tips. Maybe a rad support, I would put down additional cleaning. Dressing of the tips. You can dress these a few times, before they're no good anymore.
Yeah.
The caps, don't throw them out. Put them in a barrel. Keep them, and then once you get like a pretty heavy weight of it, copper's worth money. You
Yep.
go out and have a barbecue with it.
Yep, exactly.
You'd be surprised. They're not that expensive. They're not super inexpensive, but they're not that expensive.
we have to get it's a consumable.
Yes,
Yep.
it is.
And it's not paint and material.
No.
Wait, is it included?
No.
Yeah, no, it's not included, unfortunately.
So
Neither is the labor to clean it and stuff like that. And there's a few different ways, and there's a process I've talked with a bunch of the companies with. And look, it's every 6 to 10 welds stop. Just hit it with a piece of emery cloth or a Scotch-Brite peg.
But not 80 grit.
Not 80 grit, no. Yeah, and don't take a file and reshape it.
No.
And you don't need to, really use the sharpening tool unless there's a major issue with
Exactly.
it. And once again, you're not sharpening like a pencil.
Right.
And remember, sometimes you have two different types of sharpening.
precision welding.
One for a bigger weld and one for a smaller
Exactly.
spot weld. So keep that in mind too. Use what you're supposed to have. But make sure you do check the tips. It's very important. I usually suggest when I consult for a shop is that one technician or the parts manager signs out the equipment.
Yep.
So if Mark brings it back and he goes, oh, I got a bad tip, I'll try cleaning it or fixing it. If it doesn't work, I'll put a new tip on there, and that's it. So now when Kristen comes get the machine to utilize it, it's ready to go. There's not a problem.
Yep.
Now Kristen uses it and says, you know, Larry, to be honest with you, this button's been sticking on me. Okay, no problem. Use that one. I'll get this taken care of. Now it's out for repair, and we don't have it that you go to weld and we don't have something to use.
Yeah.
So at least if somebody signs on and off with a little small checklist, you know what's going on. Checks and balances.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So shop owners, I'm going to say something to you. So, you know, we get into shops all over the United States, and here's just a little bit of advice. Every time the machine's done, like Larry said, we want to take whatever's on there, clean them up, get it ready to go for the next one. So the next person that grabs the machine, it is ready to go. Because ultimately what will happen, after seeing this in so many shops, is the tips might look really bad. But then all of a sudden somebody goes, well, I just got 2 quick welds. Well, are they going to spend 10 minutes cleaning tips, or are they going to actually take that welder and weld with those bad tips? Now you're going to have 2 bad welds. You can completely get rid of that by having the welder ready to go, like Larry said. Kristen grabs it, she's good to go, and away we go.
And if Larry's after me, I'm not fixing it when I bring it back.
Exactly.
I'm just gonna let him deal with it. So, but when we go into shops all the time, that they've got, these are not cheap machines.
No.
I mean, this is a significant financial investment for a
course.
shop.
Yeah.
And we'll go in a shop, and they've got 3 welders. 2 of them aren't working. One's looks like that.
Yeah,
That's just
exactly. You're right.
But it's kind of like tires, right? While the tires are the only thing that touches the road and really has safety for the customer in that way, these are the only thing that touch the metal. So take care of them for the, for the love of donuts, right?
If you were to walk in the back of your shop, right after the show, don't do it now because we got more, but walk into the back of your shop, look at your tips, and then open up, like Larry, right on the top of the machine there, open it up and see how many replacement tips. Your tips probably don't look good, and you probably don't have replacement tips. Then you need to wonder what kind of welds you're doing in your shop.
Yeah,
Exactly.
well, it's critical. You could read all the procedures in the world, you could print them off, you could do whatever, but if that welder fails, the repair
doesn't matter.
fails.
Exactly.
So it looks like someone's been mauling some
Well,
of
the
these
problem is they try and take vice grips. You actually need the little knuckle knurled looking vice grip that looks like this to actually grab around the outside
To
of
take
it.
the tip off.
I know some companies, like my friends over at Metropolitan Carolina, they actually, when they sell the machine, they give you a pair of vice grips and the shunt clamp, so you have everything at your disposal and you're not destroying these like those are. Those were probably repairable tips to be sharpened, but the outside got so destroyed that they're useless. The other ones over there are badly burnt. Once again, I'm not sure if they're repairable or not. I'd have to attempt to clean them. The one down at the bottom was actually a photo I took of about 60 welds that I did on actually a CTR, and that cleaned up, funny enough, that you know, a little bit of discoloration there. That cleaned up with a Scotch-Brite pad.
Correct.
You know, and
It doesn't take much.
Doesn't
if you
take
just
much.
stay on top of it. Now, when you get them so they're so corroded, a Scotch-Brite's not going to take care of it, though.
No, it won't. So, I mean, I got a Scotch-Brite, you know, every 6 to 15 welds, just give it a quick little hit.
Yep.
The other photos are of air machines that, angle-type grinders that actually have that little sharpener that goes on the end of it to reshape the tips. You have more of a flat, slightly domed one, and then you have this angle-type, heavy domed one.
It's kind of like the sharpener in the back of the crayon box.
Yeah,
Yeah,
kind of
so-
like that.
Oh, I used to love those.
I know.
They do have a wrench application one. I'm not wild about the wrench application because it's hard to hold it straight and steady.
Exactly.
This works nicely because you can add the air pressure to it. You don't have to put a lot of inward lateral pressure to it. All you got to do is work around the axle a little bit, and it just nicely cleans it around a little bit, and you give a nice little shape to it, and that's it. And you're not sitting there going, bzzz, it's bzz, 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 and it's just cleaned up real quick.
Yeah.
You got to sit there and go, bzz,
You need some tips.
Yeah, you want
Yeah.
some tips. Kind of like when we were a kid, we used to sharpen a pencil down to
Oh,
this
yeah.
long.
All right, so I've plugged my welder in. I've let it go through its cycle. I've ensured that I have a good set of tips, right? Whether I had to dress them, clean them, or hopefully you have a program like you mentioned where the next tech behind you doesn't have to waste a whole lot of time.
Yep.
Well, now it's time to do my test welds.
Absolutely.
So I gotta do test welds on spot welding. I mean, the machine does the welding for me.
And the hands-on class that we teach, you know, you've been there and you've seen the techs and they go, oh, wow. And I'll try and trick the machine out. Somehow, some way, I'll trick the machine out to make a weld that looks good but not good or not strong enough. And, you know, your biggest your indications are smaller or not deep indentations. Not a big indent. It's supposed to be a good indent in there, and when you feel over the top of it, it shouldn't be really smooth or just have a little feel to it. You should feel an indentation. You should see a round ring, nice,
It's
clean
all about
ring.
amperage and pressure.
And the heat mark around the outside, the halo, has to be uniform. It can't be
Consistent,
really
yep.
wide and oblong or very small. You don't want like someone took a pencil and did it. You want somebody took a chisel Sharpie marker around the outside, nice and even around. Expulsion or weld splash or metal throwout is basically, you guys have probably seen it on like an A-pillar or an inner upper rail. You go to sand around a spot weld and you see all this metal sticking out like flames in a way, metal flames, and you almost slice your hand open. That's metal throwout. That usually comes from, it's not that you don't have enough current, you don't have enough pressure.
It's pressure,
between the tips. It's pressure. Remember, it's squeeze type. Squeeze is pressure.
And resistance, yep.
And then the resistance comes there. Mushrooming. As these tips become, worn, the machine, especially auto machines, have to kick up the power, and these tips will start mushrooming and bending backwards, and you get this overlay at the top, almost like a muffin in a way. It looks like a muffin top. And the problem with that is that the bigger the muffin top gets, or the bigger the mushroom protrudes outward, the higher the amperage has to go, because you have a wider range of contact area. Oblong indentation. Oblong indentation is usually from misaligned tips, or tips that are so badly used that only the left hand center side and the right hand upper side are making contact. Now you get this oblong, they're crossing each other. Excessive weld marking at deep indentations or large heat halo. Your machine's cranked up way too high for the type of material you're welding.
And that's why we got to set up the welder. And then the other thing that we see a lot of is that there's a lot of technicians go, well, I can just put the panel up there and let the pressure of the tips pull the panel together.
That's the worst thing you can do.
We got to clamp the panel tightly together, otherwise it's going to stretch the metal.
Any good frame tech should have about 40 to 80 clamps.
Yep.
And that can be anywhere from a slew of Clecos to the pressure clamp type ones, to a wide range of vice grips or some sort of locking pliers. Electrodes sticking together, sometimes you'll go to weld and one side will stick to the car and you'll have to kind of wiggle it off, or you'll pull it out and the electrodes stick together in some cases. That's metal particles. That happens. Just give it a quick cleaning. Probably you might need an emery cloth that's a little bit more coarser than Scotch-Brite. Worst case scenario, just hit it real quick with that sharpening tool.
So I'm going to say one more thing to shop owners again now. So go into your top box there, and hopefully you have at least one brand new tip. Take that tip and go to a car you recently did a weld with. And when you put it next to the weld, see if the tip flat part that would make the weld, what's the size relationship of that tip to the actual weld on the car? Oftentimes you're going to see that it's like a 5 or 6 millimeter flat spot on top of the tip, and you got a 10 millimeter weld on the car. That's a weak weld.
Right, not going to pass.
And if you have no weld markings at all, you just have basically just they came together, they made a weld, it made a sound, it didn't fail, it passed over here, but that looks, no. I just got basically just a marking on there.
Wait, is that when you can take it apart with a screwdriver?
Generally, pretty bad.
Well, and the other thing is when you read the manuals that come with the machines, and it can be these, it can be any of the manufacturers, they actually say to do test welds. In their book. Even though they got a computer. But then sometimes the salesperson will go, oh, you don't have to worry about a test weld, just look at the computer. Follow the book.
You have all greens.
Exactly.
We don't make $1 by telling you to do test welds. We don't make $1.
No.
We don't make $1 by a machine being sold. So who are you going to believe? The guy who's making money off of it, or the guy who doesn't make a dime off of it?
What we actually, for us, it's all about somebody surviving the next accident.
Right.
Correct.
That's it.
Right. So these are more.
This is
when you're welding and it looks like this.
This is after you break out the weld when you pull it apart, and this is for your visual inspection. So when you rip it apart, and this is going across section, a full button is you want metal tear out of the top hole. That's a good weld. If you walk over to a car that's been in an accident and there's a whole bunch of spot welds from the factory all ripped out. It's like, oh my God, that's horrible. It failed. No, it did what it was supposed to do. It had enough applied pressure that the outer panel has a hole and the inner panel has a whole chunk of material there. That's that full button. Irregular button is obviously that one there where that didn't pass. The tips are misaligned. The part of the tip had contaminants on it. You didn't clean the panels right. It wasn't clamped together. It's an irregular button. And then in interfacial failure is there was no welding at all. In plastic repair, they usually call that, to remind people, is a cohesive failure. The adhesive material failed itself.
Didn't stick to itself.
An adhesive failure is that it didn't stick to the panel; it wasn't set up right. But a cohesive failure is that interstitial failure. Now here are welds here with just heat marks. It had enough applied heat, but you can see there's really not a deep indentation, and you can see there's a little bit of an area that looks like a circle, and areas that don't have anything but like a shadowing mark. And these welds were easily broken with a screwdriver and just my hand twisting it. Not where if I was going to take a wedge test like Honda used to have, it's a piece of wood with a wedge, you shove it in between and see if they pop, which they shouldn't. Not agreeing that should be done on the car. But if I did a test to these, I could probably rip these apart by bare hand by just peeling them back against each other, a peel test.
And it looks like that lower picture on the left with the weld to the right. Looks like there's a crack on the inside too.
Yeah, that's going to cause also some issues. And once again, this is now funny. This was in a paint booth, ready to be primed and painted, and I still see weld soot. So not only was the machine not welding right, not only did the tech not really know what he was doing, but whoever prepped this didn't even do that a good job. So you can see where one thing sets everything off. Now, when this is all back together and done, maybe they put an aftermarket knockoff bumper on the car that didn't line up right with an aftermarket knockoff bracket, and that didn't line up right, and it goes to your shop, and you go to take it off to take care of it, and you're like, this seems odd. Now you start investigating more of the car, and now you realize, the hell with the knockoff part, that's not going to kill anybody. The problem is, if this car got into a subsequent accident...
May not kill anybody.
May not kill anybody, yeah, it depends on the ADAS system. Now, if the car gets into a subsequent accident, at least you can reuse the quarter panel because it wasn't welded on properly, it's just going to fall off the car, which probably Velcro would have held this on
Easy
better.
R9, yep.
Makes it so much easier for the R9.
All right, so here's some more of the tears.
Okay, well, this here is a peel test, and the top photo, although it tore out a very big hole, you shouldn't have one weld because you have to shunt your first weld. That'll be your weakest weld, and then you actually really test in the second weld.
Yep.
The bottom photo is a little bit better of a picture, and I tried 2 different settings on this and ripped the hell out of it. And look at the one on the right-hand side, and this is on a pressure machine. I was doing this for Carolina. The far right-hand side photo where it doesn't have a ton of tear out, but it's still passing, is the shunt. The middle one I had set at what the machine should be sat at, and the left-hand side one I lowered the setting a little bit, just to see what I would get. Notice the rip out or the tear out that you have the differences between. The shunt still passes, but look at the other ones.
Yep. Now,
there's a couple of different ways to do this. You have the tensile shear strength, which is what the manufacturers use to test welders and stuff like that, and that's a lap shear test. We usually can't do that because
we don't have the equipment to do that.
You don't have the equipment to do it, and it's not that expensive, just not worth doing it.
Yeah.
Usually you're required to do a peel test, which is make it 2 L brackets and basically weld them together, do 2 welds. Do one far back towards the end is your shunt weld. The one closer would be your weld, and then you put one in a vise and you rip it back against itself. Cross-tension weld can be used in some cases, but you can only do 1 weld. I don't recommend the cross-tension. I actually recommend the peel test.
And then back in the day, there was the twist, too.
Well, that's part of the cross-tension, yeah.
Yep.
And the peel test, at least you can do it with or without adhesive. You can peel against it. With the cross-tension, you can't do, once that adhesive cures, you're not being able to do a twist test.
No.
And you can't do a shunted weld on that, so that becomes an issue, too.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Here's 2 examples of how you would do the shunt test. The peel back test. And notice this one here where the back one that's still welded was my shunted weld. The button diameter test is the one I'm doing up front here. Now, different manufacturers will have different requirements for the size of the buttonhole that it's supposed to pull out. If they don't have anything, we'll see on the next screen here is the basically it's 5 times the metal thickness. So if I got a 1 millimeter to 1 millimeter, I'm gonna pull a 5 millimeter hole.
Yep.
Okay, basically.
And the OEMs are going to, in some cases, tell you. And the
Well,
machine
they have a
may,
chart.
in some cases, tell you.
Some companies have a chart.
Yep.
Ford has a chart for plug
Exactly.
welds and resistance welds.
Yep.
And if you have a two 1 millimeter pieces of welding together, you have to pull a 5 millimeter hole.
Yep.
If you have a 1 millimeter to a let's say a 2 millimeter, because it's like a reinforcement panel, then you should be pulling probably a 7, 8 millimeter hole.
Yep.
Okay. On that. So, but they'll usually give you a chart on stuff like that. It's also important to practice your welds, not only just 2 pieces of metal, but sometimes
three
you
or
weld
whatever.
through 3 or
Yeah.
4. And
Right.
if it's a different type of material, sometimes keeping that ultra high strength steel or advanced high strength steel, boron alloy or martensite steel laying around and cutting up some pieces does come in handy to make practice
Yeah,
welds.
don't just throw it away. It's an opportunity
Yeah,
because
it's an
you're not going to cut it
opportunity
off the car. So you got a piece of boron sitting there. You can
We
cut
put it in a
and-
box and
yep.
stuff like that because that you can't buy from a steel mill. When we do
Right.
our aluminum practicing before we, each week and especially right before the test, we crank it up. We'll buy pre-cut ones or like Ben sells, Mercedes-Benz sells actually their cast pieces. So we'll get those ready. We'll have those inside. You can't buy just, give me a sheet of boron cut up in pieces. And so you got to
Yeah.
kind of cut it
Yeah.
yourself.
Well, my test weld should be reflective of the repair I'm going to do.
Absolutely.
Correct.
So I'm
Absolutely.
just not go grab a bunch of weld coupons and let's try
So
to
if I'm
set up
welding a
this
B
welder.
pillar run, you're going to have areas, a lot of welds that are going to be just 2 layer. You're going to have a few areas that are 3 layer, and in some vehicles, you might even have 4 or 5 layers.
Wait,
of
do I
material.
need to do a test weld for each of those layers?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's included though, right?
No.
No. Well, but remember, you got an outer mild steel panel, for example,
Usually.
and an inner high strength steel. That's the
Sometimes
test
2.
weld you want to do, and sometimes 2 or 3 pieces that are
And
in
then
there.
an inner, maybe, low grade high strength steel or high strength steel inner panel.
Exactly.
Where the trim panel's attached to.
So it's not a fair fight, quote unquote, to take 2 pieces of mild steel, weld them together, do the tear, and say I'm good to go. Right? This is
Right.
actually practicing on what you're actually
And if you work
doing.
on a lot of the similar cars, this is where it's nice to have a junkyard around. Call up and say, hey, can you send me a B pillar? Well, I don't care if it's damaged or not. I'm cutting up little pieces
Yeah.
on it. And cut up that B pillar that they're going to have the outer always, and then carefully take it apart and cut it up so that you actually can cut up those little pieces.
What?
I think he just said he orders used parts.
Oh, I,
Cut up pieces, yes. Never put them on a car, but yeah, you can.
so he can use them for testing and destruction.
Yes, and the problem is that you can't buy boron alloyed steel, martensite steel,
Right.
some of those other panels. You can get high strength steel and mild steel because that's what you're changing on the car.
Yeah.
So it might be a good practice in some of these shops to, rather than just take the parts of the car and throw them off in the scrap pile.
Yeah,
when-
Right.
just hold on to them.
Hold on to it, yeah.
Well, cut them up in pieces and
Sure.
put them in a box and just list them up that way.
And then you have them. But that's, so we're going back to my setup process is fairly long,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then my test welding process can be fairly long
Yep.
because there's multiple changes and I've got to change welders and then I've got to do that during the repairs as well. So setup and test of welder is
It takes
not
time.
an hour.
No.
It depends. Once
depends,
again,
though.
if you're doing MIG, braze, aluminum welding, it could take a while, especially with aluminum because you got to wait for it to cool down. With the resistance welder, especially that you do it a lot and there's not a ton of skill level required for this, because really it mostly comes down to machine settings and pressing a button.
Yep.
You could probably get this done fairly quickly. I'm not saying it's going to be 4 hours, but most of the time, probably, maybe in the range of an hour, half hour to an hour and a half tops would be someplace in that range that you would need to do this. As you do it more and more, you get more and more used to it. You
get
put a
used
rear
to it,
body
yeah.
panel on, you're generally only welding through 2 layers of metal, maybe by the unirails that attach somehow to the rear body panel, you might have 2 layers. It's not that crazy of different type of welds.
exactly.
Unisite might be a little bit of an issue, and the first time you do something, it might be a little bit different, especially with the different types of metal.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about machine settings. So all these machines have some really fancy interfaces. ProSpot's got a new welder that even plays music for me and teaches me videos and lessons. I mean, these things they're getting kind of
Well, it's got
complicated.
a tutorial and online training, or not online training, in
Yeah.
machine training.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the machine settings.
There's a wide range of different machine settings. Almost every one of the new computerized screen type machines will have how many welds you did, what the thickness of the material was for each weld, and the amperage that went through that weld.
Yep.
You almost get a printout of your quality of the welds. And this is after you've already checked and made sure that the machine's passing the welds, but did the welds pass visual and structural
and that's
tension?
and that's a big issue, because you might get a listing saying, okay, yeah, we did 43 welds, here's the thickness, and here's the amperage that went through it. But what was the tip mushrooming, or what was the tip?
Did you prep the panels correctly?
And did we actually have the tips? Because if the tip's a little wider, obviously it can get the same amperage and have a weaker weld. So it's all about, there's still that whole aspect of the human side, not just the computer.
Yeah, so just don't think because I have a report that has me 43 little green check marks
Exactly.
that you're doing well as a shop owner. That's not documentation.
Well, it's better than nothing, but it's not conclusive.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
And there's some more different settings on
Different
the machines.
settings. Some machines you have to set the material thickness. You will pick the type of gun C-clamp you're using, the type of clamp you're using, and then some also have settings for boron, ferrous, high-strength steel, or zinc-coated steel, depending on what you're welding and stuff. Automatic welding, a lot of these machines have an automatic welding setup that's on it, that the machine basically just squeezes the trigger and it does all the figuring out for you. You still need to check it because it doesn't confirm or deny if it's a proper weld. You have to do a visual inspection, a destructive test. You have to check all your joints, as we said before, and you have to add adhesive if it's applicable for the type of repair you're doing. And if you're doing a weld bonding procedure, know if you're doing weld bonding through wet or cured adhesive.
Exactly.
Because manufacturers of the adhesive, really Fuser and 3M, have their product for the manufacturers require weld bonding, will have it that you can weld anytime, either dry or wet adhesive, so know the type of panel. Maybe if you're putting a quarter panel on, you're probably doing it through wet. If you're doing a roof panel or a van side panel, that's pretty big, a lot of welds. You might want to let it cure and weld through the dried primer. You'll get a little bit of sparking with the dried primer, so keep that in mind when you do that. So you really want to try and do it
And
through
your test welds you want to do with
dry
Sure.
or wet, depending on how you
Exactly.
weld another car. Just
Yep.
like when you do mag plug welding or seam weldings or fillet welds or open butt joint welds, you're going to do it in the same position. You can't practice all vertical or all flat. You got to practice. You're welding around a rail. You have a vertical. You have two verticals, both sides. You have an overhead for the bottom, and you got a flat for the top. And then you probably have a bunch of plug welds that are vertical. So you got to practice all those positions.
Yeah, and the other thing is when we're using, depending on which machine, which manufacturer, and how we're working with it, the weld-through primer. We want to actually do our test welds with weld-through primer.
If you're,
And
how
most
you're welding on the
shops
car
don't
is how
do
you got
that
to
part.
weld in your practice. Yes, without a doubt.
Yeah, you're recreating. I think the key is I'm recreating the repair.
Yep.
I am testing the repair. We don't test on the customer's car
Right.
at all. That's not a testing facility.
No.
So you need to, whatever is required for the actual repair on the car, that is what the technician needs to be testing.
Exactly.
And it's the responsibility of the shop owner to make sure that's getting done and documenting that. So
Exactly.
we get caught up in the automatic welding a lot. In fact, there was a question that just got posted online yesterday, and everyone's kind of discussing welders, and I hear people
You
say,
said, watch the show.
there's
look, a squirrel.
this welder does everything for me. And so if you don't believe us, right, we'll believe Honda.
Yep.
So in fact, when it gets to certain types of steels, Honda knows that welder can't tell you automatically and tells you that you cannot use the automatic setting.
Yep.
When you get to Honda's 1180 or 1500 megapascal ultra high strength steel alloyed with boron or martensite steel, there is no manual setting required. The manual setting is required. You cannot use auto set. So even if I have this CTR machine or this CR7, I have to shut off the auto, and I have to go to manual mode. And I have to make practice welds and make sure it's correct. And this is what they're telling you, how it has to be done. And if you used it on auto, you could have an issue where the welds might look good, but they're definitely not.
And how many technicians right now are going, I did not know that.
Because you didn't want.
Didn't read.
Well, I think we
So
want
the machine that guy said the other day does everything for me.
Yeah.
So I guess I don't have to plug the machine in. I don't have to turn
Plugs
it on.
itself in,
The
turns
machine
on,
just
yeah.
goes over and welds it.
Yeah.
Here, watch. I got this machine doing it too. Weld. Go weld. Weld. Go weld. Oh, wait. Don't weld yet. Read first. Read the instructions. Oh, no, it already knows the instructions. It's got an artificial. This is the problem with Facebook experts and these clown consultants that are out there that just make stuff up, and then all of a sudden people believe it and they think it's real.
Right.
And now you got these guys professing stuff. It was even like the guy who was talking about OEM One Stop gives you all the information. No, it doesn't. It gives you links to go to.
Gives you a link.
Yeah, it gives you a link.
Yeah.
It's no different than the our car RTS.
Well,
Gives
it
you a
gives
link.
you a link. Actually, our car gives you more information than One Stop does.
Yeah.
They both give you links.
I love salesmen. I like their passion and their energy, but I think we've gotten to where we want to try to make everything as automatic as possible,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Not even just our welding, but why don't they always just give me the procedures? Well, come on now, there's a little bit of work involved if you're going to fix cars. So if nothing else as we take away from today, let's take away the fact that automatic welding does not negate your
doesn't
responsibility. Yeah, it doesn't really.
It makes
exist.
things easier.
Yeah.
It will add some efficiency, but it is not fully automatic. Or whatever. It's just like the gun experts saying, well, that automatic rifle is dangerous. Yeah, if I pull the trigger, if I just sit in my corner, nothing's going to happen.
It's only dangerous if I'm mad.
Right, exactly. just like this auto machine is not auto. It's semi-auto because I still have to put it on the car and press the button.
Yeah.
It's not automated, you know?
All right, so one of the keys that we do wrong most of the time, right, is we get, let's say I do all this welder setup, I got this all down, I'm good to go, and then I don't prep the flanges or the replacement panel correctly.
Yep.
Failure.
Has to be completely clean to bare metal, both sides. Suggestion is that if you're welding next to the original welds, just make enough spot that is for the resistance welder. You don't need to clean the entire flange down to bare metal and everything like that. Keep that factory E code. Keep some of the other preserved material that the factory put in there. These roll-lock discs work great to clean up areas. They're great for mag welds, MIG welds, and brazing, and obviously for resistance welds. It's,
Right.
Make sure that you do not reduce the thickness of the material, the substrate. Just remove the coatings. That's all you want to do. And then obviously wipe with wax and grease remover. Make sure there's no oils or crap on there.
Yep. And then the other part of it is that depending on what manufacturer, what machine, how many sides do we clean? Is it just the outsides, or is it the insides? And then we clean the insides and put a weld through primer in there and weld through it. And there's different variations of that. So just because I grab
through primer, Volkswagen, for example, Volkswagen requires you to take the factory E-coat off the inside of the panel that you're welding together.
That's Volkswagen, though.
Right, and you're taking off the factory E-coat, and they want you to spray their zinc-coated primer on there. And on the flange on the existing car, you sand all the material off and do it. The outside looks like this, where you just sand wherever you have to sand to put the weld.
So we're not going to, even though it's a similar process, we're not going to use this machine and the flange preparation the same way on every car for every manufacturer.
Right.
And
Which means we have to read.
help
I
you
gotta read.
Now, if I tell a B tech, to sand the inside of the panel, spray the weld through primer, attach the panel. Now, I already lined up the panel, and now I'm going to go around and I'm going to clean up each one of those spots. And I did the practice welds and the test welds, and I'm not shutting the machine off. Now I tell the tech, here, wherever I made a clean spot, you go and weld. I'm now training a tech that maybe doesn't know what he's doing with this to eventually become my position or whatever the case may be, but I'm working that mentoring type system, or I'm working with a tech and giving them something. Then the auto machine really comes in handy where I don't have to change a lot of settings, and if I already did my practice welds, I could probably have somebody else, after I put some anchor welds on there with the resistance welder, have them weld the other 20, 30, 40 welds on there, and then just clean it up with a roll-lock disc. Because with that roll-lock disc, you're not warping panels, and you're not destroying material and shaving it down to nothing.
And then back to the bulletproof file. So a lot of people, even if they are doing a destructive test with a picture, we will want to take a picture of the preparation of the materials we did, how we did it, then do the weld, then the destruction. So you are probably talking at least 3 pictures per destruct test for your file. And then further to that, when you're going to put the panel on the vehicle, take a picture of inside the flanges. How did you prep it? Because on Volkswagen, they're very specific.
Yeah. So
I mean, photos are cheap.
let's talk about shunting the weld, right? I think, would shunt pliers be considered like the unicorn of the collision repair center?
Yeah, kind of. Bigfoot.
So many people sell them or give them. I want to say they don't sell them. So many companies, not just Stimmy car liner guy, we love our car liner guys, but they give them away.
And they don't know how to use them.
And then they're disappearing. Like, where do they go? I mean, Is it like socks? Will I one day find my missing socks and shunt pliers
No,
everywhere?
because a lot of people look at it and they go, well, I don't know what this is for, but you know what? It certainly holds a panel on well when I'm gluing it, right?
Oh yeah, right, great.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about shunting that first weld.
The biggest problem with the welds is your first weld's always going to be your weakest, and you need to make an electrical current connection because you don't have one there. So you need to have some sort of ability to create an electrical path for it to go through. Now remember, the pitch is important, not to shunt through the previous weld. Now I can go with the first shunted weld, and then every weld after that, as we see in these pictures here, the pitch is the distance between the welds. So you have to keep what the factory tells you to, otherwise you can make each weld progressively weaker because there's a certain amount of that electrical energy that goes back through this, so you're making each weld progressively weaker. Specialized pliers. If you use regular vice grips, especially the small ones, you guys have probably burnt out your little spring, or they get very hot after a while.
Yep.
Okay, so every clamp that you put on the car has to be insulated. Basically, some sort of electrical duct tape or regular electrical tape, put it on there, and then clamp it on.
Plastic caps with some of them too.
Little piece of leather or whatever the case is, something that's going to insulate the clamp from actually.
Otherwise, it's going to shunt.
It's going to shunt through that, and you're just going to wind up with a very weak area. And I've seen guys do that. Oh, I got all the clamps. Like Larry, I watched your videos. I read your articles. I've got all these clamps. Okay, you didn't read the article all the way because they're all bare metal, and watch this, and you start popping welds, and you realize there's an issue with it, or you actually destructively test them, and it pulls a small hole, not 5 times the
Do y'all remember
material
that
thickness.
one that got posted on Facebook that had like 150 clamps?
I remember that.
all the way around
I remember that. Who has that many clamps?
I don't know, it was like Pinhead
was
did a quarter
amazing.
panel.
Yeah.
But shunting is important. You should have the specialized pliers for it, and then you're going to get rid of those, right?
As soon as you do your first
First
weld,
weld,
get rid
pop
of it.
them off.
If you're doing let's say you're doing a rocker door open, 2 door openings, a rocker panel, and up on the B pillar. So maybe on the B pillar you put one up high, you start doing your welds. You go all the way down, you get down to the bottom base. In the middle of the door opening in the front, you put another shunt clamp. In the middle of the door opening in the back, you put a shunt clamp. And then when you do the bottom of the rocker, put one more shunt clamp. So maybe you got to move that clamp 4 times, and that's really about it.
And remember, this is electricity, so electrical components around can be an issue.
Always have the battery disconnected. Make sure you follow that. In some companies, you should be disconnecting the airbag control module. You don't want to shut the ground.
Let's just repeat. So we've talked about all these things right now that can make my spot welding bad. But let's listen to what Larry said. 1, if I can't find my shunt clamps in the shop, I have a problem. But 2, if as an owner or a production manager, I'm not used to seeing a technician in the right situation, move that clamp around a couple times. Larry, are we fixing the car right?
Nope.
No. So then you have Larry come into your paint booth and rip panels off cars. This is how Larry wins friends and influences people.
I've worked with a few shops that got a resistance welder in and wanted me to come in and sit there all day long like a coach and work with the technician throughout the entire day of putting the panel on and going through some tricks and stuff like that. I have a class that Kristen and I have taught that does steel, mag welding, MIG brazing, and resistance welding. The aluminum class is a completely different one because that takes, an overview is just 1 day. If you really want the right training, it'll take you 3 or 4 days for it. But your squeeze type doesn't take up a lot of time with the welding process, but we can go through it and
there's
do
just
a
some things you gotta
workshop
pay
and everyone
attention
gets
to.
used to it. It's just a matter of getting the confidence and understanding all the little nuances or mistakes you make. No different than your painter. He kind of learns how to mix the paint and apply the paint. Yeah, but what happens when a bug falls in it? What happens when the hose breaks and hits the side of it? What happens when I lean into it and I leave a mark? Besides sanding it all
cup
down and
falls off the
repainting it, how do I fix it? And that's what some paint companies do. They teach you mistakes and how to fix them.
Well, and we could equate this to paint too, because we can grab a paint gun, we can dump some paint in, I can hand it to anybody and say, hey, all you do is just pull the trigger and go like this. Now, we know as people that paint cars, there's a lot more to it than that, but that's as simple kind of as it is. Same thing here, there's training.
Right.
There's
a lot of stuff to do. So, Larry, you've got some stuff in here about distance, like what you were talking about, too far apart, too close together.
Keep in mind that the location of original plug welds cannot be determined. So you got 2 new panels you're doing. Follow the manufacturer says. If not, then weld holes should be 40 millimeters apart from each other. So that's plug weld holes. Now, in some cases, they'll have a case of plug weld holes or resistance welds. Okay, that they'll tell you that. And where structural adhesive was present, space the plug welds every 20 millimeters apart. Now, this particular one had this listed under resistance welds, not under plug welds. Under plug welds, it said that you have to put tape over the plug weld areas. I guess this is just a misprint from them, and I copied it directly. So that's something to keep in mind, that when you do read it, read where it's sitting, and then also read the plug welds, and you'll see, oh, you can't, you can't plug weld through adhesive. The adhesive one told you got to put, 1.5-inch piece of tape to keep the area clean.
And there are our magical unicorn.
And that looks like a thing from the film Alien, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Denfix sells these. A few other companies do sell them. It's not worth trying to make your own. I've tried pricing it out and coming up with it. It's just not worth it. If you're making 30 of them, yeah, it pays for you to make it yourself. If you're not, you only want to make one off, then this is really all you need.
Bottom line is, it's just a wire that goes from one to the other with the copper and
feet, and it's basically allowed the electrical current to come around to the opposite side and get that weld to make proper, especially when you're welding through some sort of material such as adhesive, or what we're going to see in the very near future. I know OEMs are working on this now, is seam sealer that you can actually weld through, that it doesn't completely melt away or blow out of the hole.
And I am excited that you mentioned that, because coming up here soon before the year is over, we are actually going to talk a lot about weld through seam sealer and the applications that it has and what's coming out from the OEs, because it's a darn fine, nice repair.
That's a
smart
idea.
So I mean, I'm kind of starting to lean to where I don't even care with the OE.
It's kind of like when you get the salesman who wants to show you the weld through the plastic bottle. And like I try to explain it to you, oh yeah, I'm not ever going to weld through a plastic bottle. No, the plastic bottle is supposed to represent adhesive, so that there's not an issue with them carrying around adhesive and it drying up. So, but to do that, I have to shunt the first weld. There's no electrical connection between the two panels, so you have to do that. Zinc primer can sometimes cause an issue with not creating a clean area. So once you get one clean area, then you get that weld, and then you can go on and weld.
All right, but guys, let's get to a car. This is our famous Chevrolet Cruze. We talk
keep
about the
showing
Cruze.
this picture in multiple different shows.
I know, we love this car.
Perfect.
What I love about it is that this is, I guess, well, next week we're going to cover Mercedes-Benz.
And you're going to see a car that's from Benz, except for that slotted welds, like area number 8 on there, where you have the slotted MIG brazing. You're going to see almost an identical type of repair with the silicone bronze, the resistance welds, and the rivets.
But I hear this all the time, and in fact, we've got a General Motors store a little south of us here right now, that I fix GMs or I fix Fords. I don't have to worry about all this fancy stuff. And here's a $19,000 Chevrolet Cruze. It's probably one of the top bought fleet cars.
This car is going to wind up in probably most shops across the country.
Yeah. So let's go over
it. You have to keep in mind that GM this year changed their procedures. It went from what we would call like a sketch type drawing to more of a animated, computerized drawing, more factual type pictures.
Easy to find my place.
You would get engineers, type instructions. And now they're giving you, outside of this being some sort of a 5-door coupe or 5-door sedan or a little mini station wagon, as I like to call it sometimes, you couldn't tell what kind of car this is. It could almost be a BMW X1 or an X3, the little SUV. It's very similar to that German look of how they give their procedures. And now they're doing what they should be doing all along, is they're giving you the spot weld callouts, they're giving you a waterproof rivet, 10X is 10 of them.
10 of them.
370 millimeter seam braze at number 4, which is the rocker panel area to the B-pillar area. And the sail panel number 6, they're telling you it's a 260 millimeter MIG braze. They're giving you 14 by 5 by 18 millimeter slot brazes at number 7. Number 8 is 6 5 by 18 millimeter slot brazes.
So anywhere in this procedure, can I substitute a welding method?
No.
You know what? I'm not going to buy a spot welder.
No. Part of it is the waterproof rivet. That's a leak issue, and then on top of that, and next week we'll talk a little bit more about this on the Mercedes show. But at the bottom we're riveting. Then we're using squeeze type in the opening, and then we got to braze, and it's all about how much are we heating the metal up, the ease of it, etc. So we substitute anything in there, we change how that car is going to crash in the next collision. So when should we know this information? When we write the estimate.
Right, 'cause
like
if
we don't
I
have a
don't-
MIG brazer, we shouldn't fix this car.
We don't have a spot welder.
You know, I'm ordering a quarter panel. Maybe I should order, 10 rivets, the waterproof rivets that are actually specified for the vehicle.
The absolute worst time is, if I'm not consulting for your shop, the absolute worst time is for me to read it to you. And
Absolutely.
that's usually when I'm sitting in a court, when I'm testifying, and I'm reading the repair procedure to the jury and going over with the jury and saying to them they should have read this beforehand, and there were no indications during the examination that any of these procedures were followed.
Well, it's very simple because you look at, even in somebody's file, you pull it off of wherever, there's a date on there. And the car came in, and the parts came in, and the technician flagged it at this day, and then 4 days later, we got the date on the bottom of the, it's pretty obvious you didn't use this to fix this.
Nah.
You know, and it's funny because there'd be times I go to a shop for an inspection, and James Moore used to come with me a lot, and James would be there and stuff, and James always tried to play the good cop, and
In
I'd be like,
Ferragamos.
Yeah.
Miss Ferragamo. And I said, this is atrocious, this is that. And James used to always say to him, he can, but he's not wrong. Like, he try, like they would all be bent out of shape and stuff like that. Even sometimes when somebody try to consult me, it's like, I can't help you. It's like, he can't help you. You don't even do a good bad job. And they'd ask, what's that? Well, here's a good bad job example. You put on a quarter panel on a BMW and you weld it on with resistance welds and mag plug welds. That's not proper.
Yeah.
But we'd have a leak in the trunk in the back seat. And it's like, you don't even do a good bad job.
Yep.
The weld holes are off, just like all the problems we talked about with resistance welders, the plug holes had, metal sticking through the, through the hole and stuff like that, or they're not completely filled, or there's body filler all over the place. It's like you didn't even do a good bad job.
Yeah.
It's like that case I had with the
Nissan.
rear body panel.
Yep.
And I said in court, and the lawyer let me get away with it. It's like, the panel, if he would have followed the procedures for not the manufacturer,
It could have been
for
a
the
good
glue
bad
co-
job.
And I had the company. I found out which company it was because we threw a spectrograph and found out who the company was. And I said, there's 8 steps. He couldn't follow 8 steps. He didn't even do a good bad job. The lawyer asked me, what do you mean by that? Look, a squirrel. I said to him,
Dinner?
He didn't follow if he would have glued this on the proper way, no one would have discovered this. And if they would have put the seam sealer on cleanly, no one would have discovered it.
Yep.
We discovered it, and they didn't even do a good bad job. The adhesive wasn't cured. 2 years later, I ripped the body panel off in a video for testimony. You saw me take it off with my bare hands. I used a little small screwdriver and a little baby ball peen hammer, got a hole open, got my hand in there, and started pulling the whole panel off. The shop re-repaired the car by cleaning all the flanges and re-welding it on. It was brand new.
Yep.
They cut it off cleanly, and that was the whole. And this started with a bumper cover that didn't line up. A bumper cover didn't line up,
Yep.
and they wanted to do DV to the car.
Well, and what's amazing is that vehicle we looked at yesterday with the roof that was glued on and the seam sealer, I grabbed
The
it with my
mobile
finger.
aquarium.
Yeah, the mobile
yes.
aquarium, because it was leaking so bad, I just pulled up and just,
Listen,
my gosh.
when they were done with the repair and putting it on, as per the insurance company who pays them because they're in charge,
Yeah.
they give you a free umbrella
Yeah.
and a rain slicker. It works out great.
And 2 goldfish.
And 2 goldfish.
Yeah.
They swim around on the bottom.
Yeah. So the time is, there are a few OEs out there that will occasionally allow a substitute process, right?
Yeah.
They'll allow some
Sometimes.
plug welding.
Well,
and
GM
replace
a few years back used to have, let's say for like the rear body panels on, let's say a Chevy Malibu from like 8 years ago. Up until probably about 3 years ago, they had
Cobalt, actually.
You can
Yeah.
mag, Cobalt too.
Yeah.
You can mag weld it on with plug welds. You could resistance weld it on, or guess what? You
could rivet it.
If you use one of these 2 adhesives, you can just bond it on.
Yep.
Their bedside panels on most of their pickup trucks were bond, resistance weld, or mag weld if you want.
Right.
It's up to you. It's almost like, well, use Velcro if you wanted to.
Yeah.
Didn't matter. But because materials have changed, processes have changed, and their vehicle design platforms have changed.
Right.
GM now introduces silicone bronze. And when I used to talk about Benz and Audi and Porsche, be like, no one uses that crap here in America. I only fix American cars. Well, guess what? This is an E or C class repair procedure, except for the slot welds.
Well, so I think it's pretty much safe to say, I want to say fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your point of view, if you're going to fix vehicles that have sustained collision repair where you believe that you're going to be replacing panels, unless you're just going to do bolt-on hoods and fenders, you're going to have a spot welder.
Absolutely.
It's not an optional piece of
It's a
equipment.
bare minimum for a shop.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, listen, just go to, what is it, a short performance list of trying being on those programs.
I'll leave it this way.
And
When
just
it's
look at the
even
list
a
of what
minimum
tools you need.
requirement for the insurance company on
Yeah.
a DRP program, come
Yeah.
on, folks. That's just, you
minimum.
gotta have it.
And that's
Yeah.
the saddest part. If you're on a DRP and an insurance company has to tell you what the bare minimum is to just be on their program, and they have to list a frame machine, a measuring system, and a resistance welder, maybe you don't belong in this business, because if you actually need to have an insurance company tell you that, who has no business in our business whatsoever, you know,
So here's mine.
it's
You're
sad.
behind the curve.
Yeah.
And if you're listening and you are, I mean, so I'm going to put my insurance hat on because this used to drive me bat crazy. So if you're listening and you're in the insurance industry and you have anything to do with direct repair shops, I need you to do a couple of things for me. One, if you're working with a shop that has multiple locations, please make sure that they didn't send you the same picture of the same welder.
Yep.
And they're trying to pass that off for every location. You're going to have one at each place.
Well, make sure they also take the select machine and bring it around from each certified shop to each certified shop. Check the numbers on that.
Yeah.
Yep.
But, and then so secondly, I will say this, one thing I love about Subaru is they check serial numbers.
Absolutely.
So they actually call the manufacturer, and I'm like, I love you, man. So, and then two, if you go to a shop and they have one in the corner, how about you make them plug it in? At one time in my other past life, we used a program called AutoWatch to monitor shops, and I loved
you
it.
watched, didn't
Because
you?
I did. I could set it 50,000 feet and wait for you to upload a picture I didn't like. And it was a particular shop that had uploaded a picture of a quarter panel, and they were mag welding the quarter panel on. The OE had a specific requirement, and they had a picture in their file that said they had the welder, and I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to fly in. Let's
Yeah.
just, I mean,
Let's
I'm
see how
not
this
even going
goes.
to
And it was in a
call.
box still.
Right. Well, no, they had it, but nowhere in the building did they have the electricity to plug it in.
Right.
That usually makes it work better. I could be wrong.
Yeah. So they had that.
that's-
they were meeting the
that's semi-common.
requirement, but my field appraiser was too stupid to know that they couldn't plug it in the whole building, and so he didn't have a job much longer.
I know
after
one.
that, but-
I know one DRP program requires you to have electronic measuring. I know a shop who bought it, brand new, sitting in the back office. I tell them, you want to sell it to me? It's 3 years old. You haven't used it once. It needs all sorts of updates, but I'll buy it off you for half the price because you haven't used it. It's got more dust on it than it did use. You know, well, they didn't say I had to use it. Kind of like the old motorcycle helmet law in New York. You had to be wearing your helmet. Guys used to ride around on their knee or on their elbow with it.
It didn't say
Technically,
on
I'm
your head.
wearing it.
Yeah.
Didn't say you had to put it on your head. They changed the law, but you know, I mean, that's the problem. No accountability.
No.
No one checks it. No one goes over it.
No, but it's getting worse and worse and worse. Which I mean, if my field adjusters aren't smart enough to know the shop can't plug in a stupid welder and is getting credit for it, well, then what else do they know? So, anyway, that's that. We went divergent on that one a little bit, but those are my two tips. Just make sure there's one for every location, and two, actually they can plug it in and it powers
Well, you brought up your pet peeve. Can I bring up my pet peeves?
No.
Oh.
So.
We don't have time for your pet peeves.
There are several letters from attorneys that allow me that I am not allowed to let you talk about your pet peeves. So I want to thank everybody for joining us for this one. We decided that this was just a topic we weren't talking enough
Right.
about.
I think
that
it's the third time we've done this.
Well, the whole part
But
about
live.
the automatic
Yeah.
and just, here's some things, guys. I would love a day when the piece of machinery, like artificial intelligence for estimating, that'd be sweet. It doesn't work. So let's just let that dream go out the window right now. And our welders aren't that smart either. So we still owe our customers a duty of care, and that includes setup, destructive testing, proper panel, and then making sure that you're getting the job done right.
Yep.
All right.
They got ideas for new ideas you want us to talk about? Post it on the Collision Up page.
Yep.
Remember, we got the big
Respond
class
to the
coming up
Facebook.
in
Vegas?
Vegas. We
Yep.
have. That's going to
Yeah,
be huge. We
I
got
think
some
there's.
surprises.
I haven't got an update yet because NCS pulled off a block of tickets. Bless them. They are. I want to say there's only like 12 or 13 seats left for that whole class in Vegas.
And what do we have? A max of 100, I think, on that or something?
100. I can't.
100.
Yeah.
Is it? Yeah. It's
Finding
finding space. Yeah.
conference space in Vegas during SEMA week.
Order
isn't-
before midnight tonight.
And
Yeah.
we just recently did one with Zimmerman's was really helpful with us and got us a room full of 100. It was a big conference area in a hotel. I don't like that. I would have rather done 2 days of 50.
Right.
1 day of 50 and 1 day of 50 because
I'm good with a day
it
of
gets
100.
so
Yeah.
big. And I think that's the max we should do is 100. I'm kind of excited for the first day of the estimating, and that's always fun, and people learn a bunch of stuff. But I'm really excited what you've planned and what you have set up for the second day of going around as part of the price. Pay one price, you get the 2-day thing. The second day, we're going to get some insights and some special guest appearances.
Yeah. So on day 2, if you choose. We cannot get you into SEMA, so I've gotten a few questions asked. Your
Not
ticket
related
to
to
our
SEMA.
estimating class does not include SEMA. You still have to apply and pay the $40 fee for a SEMA pass and you know, all that. But day 2, which is the first day of the SEMA show, you can meet us at 9 a.m. outside, and we will walk into the North Hall, and we're going to have some special guests and some presentations, but we're also going to visit some booths.
Yes.
Because we're going to talk about, there are some new welders coming out that we want you to see and have first chances to get your hands on. We're going to stop by and visit some OEs. We're going to visit some other manufacturers of tools and equipment. And you're going to get specialized presentations from those vendors to talk to you about what they have to offer.
Little
and what
Q&A.
they're
We
bringing to
want
market.
at least one OEM that's willing to give us some Q&A. That's going to be helpful. If we get another 1 or 2 on that, that'd be great for these.
And as an added bonus, you get to hang out with Larry for a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, I
figure
don't
it
think there could be anything funner than probably walking the SEMA floor with us on opening day. Wait, maybe there could be. I will be peeling off.
Larry reading his
Yeah.
OEM procedures. That's coming up soon.
In his smoking jacket.
My smoking jacket.
I will peel off for about 20 or 30 minutes on that tour. We will head over to visit a booth that's going to unveil. We have a couple celebrity guests that want to say hi, so we'll be taking everybody over to meet those celebrities while they
That'd be great.
unveil their cars and latest creations for the SEMA show. So there is a lot coming up there in that class, and I'm excited about it.
I think it's well worth the price, not only because, and you guys
Well,
see on
today was
Facebook.
me.
Well, you see the Facebook thing where, like I said, no, it's well worth the price of the class and stuff. The second day, I think, is the big thing. I think that I'm really excited about that. We're going to get around with a bunch of the collision people who want to make a difference and understand things
Yeah.
and really get some good insight on what's going on.
You'll go,
and what's
the
coming
first
up.
estimate you write the day you go home, you get your money back.
Yeah.
Paid for it.
So, and then everything after that is just lanyard. So we're good to go. All right. Well, thanks for joining us.
Yep,
We will
thank
be
you.
back here next month. If you're looking at the calendar, there is a class scheduled for next month that was about some refinishing, but there's some other things happening in the industry right now that we think may be
Yeah, we're gonna change it
important to
up.
talk about. So,
Yep.
but as I really said, if you have any.
Next week, Mercedes-Benz, the OEM
Yep.
show.
Yeah,
Don't forget that. Tune in next week.
Next week, Mercedes-Benz, and that was a great one because that was the car I always hated, and I'd call Larry and go, "I'm tired of looking. Just tell me what to do." So it would be
Send
good
it to me.
I don't
and
want to
we'll fix
read,
it.
Larry. I do not want to read. So awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, and you
Yep.
guys have a fantastic day.